The snow was falling harder than usual that night, thick flakes catching in Claire's hair as she turned onto the familiar street. Christmas lights blinked from every porch except one, the one she called home. Her car rolled to a stop, headlights sweeping across the driveway, and that's when she saw them. Suitcases, boxes, her coat crumpled in the snow like it had been thrown, not placed. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She stepped out slowly, snow crunching under her boots, heart pounding louder than the wind. The front door creaked open. Margaret stood there, arms crossed, a thin smile playing on her lips, the kind of smile that had haunted every dinner, every silence, every unspoken insult for 3 long years. "You don't live here anymore," Margaret said. Neighbors peered from behind curtains. Claire said nothing. Not yet. It hadn't always felt this cold. When Claire first walked into this house as David's new wife, she'd carried hope in her chest like a lit candle, fragile but bright. She remembered unpacking her books onto the hallway shelf, hanging a small painting her father had given her, believing this could be a home. Margaret had other plans. The first week, Claire noticed her painting had been moved to the garage. "It didn't match," Margaret said, without looking up from her tea. The second week, dinner was served for three: David, Margaret, and Margaret's sister. Claire's plate simply wasn't set. No one mentioned it. No one apologized. It became a pattern. Claire's name, mispronounced on purpose. Her opinions, spoken over before she finished a sentence. Family photos on the mantle. Everyone without her in it, as though she'd been quietly erased from a story she was supposed to be part of. She told herself it would get better. She told herself Margaret just needed time. She swallowed the hurt at every holiday dinner, every birthday where her gifts were opened last, if opened at all. 3 years of small cuts. 3 years of silence dressed up as patience. And through it all, Claire never once mentioned what she carried in the depths of her purse. A folded document, worn soft at the edges, that could have changed every single conversation in that house. She wasn't ready. Not yet. David was not a cruel man. That was the hardest part. He was gentle in private, quick to hold her hand under the table, quick to whisper apologies when his mother's words cut too deep. But the moment Margaret raised her voice, David seemed to shrink, a grown man folding himself back into the shape of a scolded child. "She's just old-fashioned," he'd say every single time. "She'll come around, Claire. Just give her time." Time. Always more time, as if patience alone could dissolve 3 years of quiet cruelty. Claire remembered one night in particular, a Sunday dinner where Margaret had looked directly at her and said, "I don't understand what David sees in someone so ordinary." The table had gone silent. Claire had waited, just 1 second, one heartbeat, for David to say something, anything, in her defense. He'd cleared his throat instead and changed the subject to football. That night, lying awake beside him, Claire realized something that frightened her more than Margaret's insults ever could. David wasn't going to protect her, not because he didn't love her, but because he didn't know how to stand up to the woman who raised him. He loved Claire quietly, in the safety of closed doors, but never loud enough for his mother to hear. Claire began to understand that if anyone was going to protect her dignity in that house, it would have to be herself. Christmas Eve morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of sky that promised snow before noon. Claire was in the kitchen, humming quietly as she wrapped the last of the gifts, a sweater for David, a scarf she'd chosen carefully for Margaret, hoping, still hoping, that some gesture of warmth might finally be returned. Margaret walked in, coffee in hand, and watched her for a long moment. "You know," she said, setting her cup down with a deliberate click, "I think it's time you understood something, Claire. This house, this life, it isn't yours. You're here because David wanted you here. Nothing more." Claire's hands stilled over the wrapping paper. "If David ever came to his senses," Margaret continued, voice smooth as glass, "you'd have nowhere to go, no name on anything, no claim to anything. You'd just be a woman who used to live here." The words landed like small, precise blows, meant to diminish, meant to remind Claire of a powerlessness Margaret was certain she possessed. Claire didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at her mother-in-law, and for the first time in 3 years, she let herself feel the full weight of everything unsaid, including the one truth Margaret couldn't have been more wrong about. She finished wrapping the gift in silence. Margaret smiled, mistaking silence for surrender. She had no idea what was coming. By evening, Claire had left to pick up last-minute groceries. Cranberry sauce Margaret had forgotten, though Claire suspected it was never really forgotten at all. When she pulled back into the driveway an hour later, headlights sweeping across the yard, her stomach dropped. Her suitcases, her winter coat, a cardboard box with her book spilling out, pages already damp with snow. She sat frozen in the car for a moment, hands still on the wheel, before stepping out into the cold. The front door opened before she reached it. Margaret stood in the doorway, arms crossed, framed by the warm golden light of the living room behind her. A warmth Claire was no longer welcome to share. "I told you," Margaret said simply, "this isn't your home." Claire looked past her, searching for David. He stood near the stairs, phone in hand, eyes down, saying nothing. Not a word. Not this time either. Something inside Claire went very still. Not panic, not heartbreak, but a quiet, settling clarity. She had spent 3 years hoping to be seen, hoping to be valued, hoping someone in this house would finally stand beside her. She didn't need that anymore. Claire reached into her coat pocket, fingers closing around her phone. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply dialed a number she'd saved 3 years ago and never once had reason to use. "Hi, it's Claire," she said calmly, snow settling on her shoulders. "I need to speak with my lawyer." The next morning, Christmas morning, a black car pulled into the driveway just as Margaret was setting the table for brunch, humming to herself. Victorious in a war she didn't know she'd already lost. The doorbell rang. Margaret opened it, expecting carolers or a delivery. Instead, a man in a gray coat stood there, holding a leather folder. "I'm looking for Margaret and David Whitmore," he said. "I'm Claire's attorney." Margaret's smile faltered. "I don't understand." "This property," the attorney said, opening the folder, "was purchased 11 years ago by Robert Hale, Claire's late father. Upon his passing, ownership transferred fully and legally to his daughter, Claire Hale, now Claire Whitmore. Every deed, every tax record, every piece of documentation confirms it. You have been residing in a home that belongs, in full, to your daughter-in-law." Margaret's coffee cup slipped slightly in her hand. "That's not possible. This is David's family home." "It was your family's residence," the attorney corrected gently. "Not your family's property. There's a difference." David appeared behind his mother, pale, silent, finally understanding the weight of every dinner where his wife had gone, quietly unmentioned, unprotected, in a house that had been hers to give, not his to withhold. The attorney handed over a single envelope. Inside was a formal notice. 30 days to vacate, signed by Claire herself, dated the night before, Christmas Eve, the same night she'd stood in the snow with nowhere to go. Margaret stood frozen in the doorway long after the attorney's car had disappeared down the snowy street, the eviction notice trembling slightly in her hands. For the first time in 3 years, she had nothing to say. David found Claire 2 days later, staying at a small inn 20 minutes from the house. The same inn she'd once dreamed of hosting their anniversary dinner in, back when she still believed this marriage could be a partnership instead of a silence she endured alone. "I didn't know," he said quietly, standing in the doorway of her room. "I should have said something. Every time. I should have stood up for you." Claire looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, but with a calm, quiet clarity that came from finally choosing herself. "I know," she said, "but you didn't. And I can't keep waiting for someone to decide I'm worth defending." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The house, the papers, the truth, they had already spoken loudly enough. 3 months later, Claire stood in the doorway of that same house, now fully hers, sunlight pouring through windows that had once felt so cold. She'd repainted the walls, hung her father's painting back in the hallway where it belonged, and set the table for one. Not out of loneliness, but out of peace. She thought of Margaret sometimes, of the silence, of the years spent shrinking herself to fit into a space that was never meant to hold her small. Not anymore. This home, every corner, every room, finally belonged to the version of herself she'd been too afraid to become. She was home, truly, fully home.